Hello again, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about reported speech. But before we begin talking about reported speech, do you remember what it is? If not, don't worry, because we're going to review direct and reported speech very quickly right now. So, if we're using direct speech, it means that we are reporting exactly what someone says. For example, if I say, Annie says, I'm exhausted, I need some rest. I am telling you the exact quote, the exact words that she says. And when I write these, I need to use quotation marks, those two little marks that hang up on each side of a word or phrase. However, if I want to tell you what she says and report it to you, I would say something like, Annie says she is tired. She needs to get some rest. Here, it's important to note that a few words change, mainly she is and she needs. If the introductory verb used is in the present simple, then nothing special changes, but there are a few changes that we will need to make because the person, first, second, or third person, will change. So let's look at a few examples. In the first example, Richard says, I set aside an hour to study English every day. This becomes, Richard says he sets aside an hour to study English every day. Here we add an S to the verb set because the subject has changed from I to he. In another example, Richard says, I've set myself a goal of enriching my English vocabulary every day. To report it, Richard says he has set himself a goal of enriching his English vocabulary every day. So when we report this, we change I have to he has, again, changing perfect tenses. I have set myself, he has set himself. And again, we change myself to himself because, again, the subject has changed from I and me to he. Finally, one more set of examples. Richard says, I've been learning English as a second language at school. And to report it, Richard says he has been learning English as a second language at school. Here, even though we're using the present perfect continuous tense, the change is exactly the same as before. I becomes he. And this is all you really have to change as long as the introductory verb is in the present simple tense. Just remember to change your pronouns. So, we can conclude that if the introductory verb, usually says or tells, is in the present simple tense, we do not change the rest of the sentence around it. However, you must remember to use the correct pronouns. Be sure to replace I's and me's with he's, hims, she's, hers. I think you get the idea. But now we're going to kick it up a notch and talk about something that's a little bit more complicated and more common. And that's when the introductory verb is in the past simple tense. For example, said or told. But this will be easier to look at with a few examples, so work with me here. Sarah said, I'm delighted to hear you today. Or, in reported speech, Sarah said she was delighted to hear you that day. Here, it's important to note that the present simple tense will move to the past simple tense. And furthermore, be sure to change your time expression, and we previously referred to these as signal words. Be sure to change your time expression appropriately. Now, another set of examples. I'm reading an English book now. Or if I report it, Sarah said she was reading an English book then. Now here, the present continuous tense will move to the past continuous tense. So, present simple to past simple, present continuous to past continuous. And again, be sure to change now to then. Because, like always in past continuous, it is happening at a specific time. Now, another example. I have made good progress in speaking. Or, reported, she said she had made good progress in speaking. Here, the present perfect tense changes to the past perfect tense. And that's all with the present tenses. So just remember that if you need to report speech in the present tense, it will just move to its equivalent past tense structure. Present simple to past simple, present continuous, past continuous, present perfect, past perfect. But now let's look at the past tense, where things get a little strange. For example, if I say, or if Sarah says, I slept through my alarm. To report this, I will say, she said she had slept through her alarm. Here, the past simple tense will change to the past perfect tense in reported speech. Another set of examples. I was watching a video lecture on English at 5 o'clock yesterday. And here I can say either she said she was watching, or she said she had been watching a video lecture on English at 5 o'clock the day before. Here, the past continuous can do one of two things. It can either become the past perfect continuous, or it can stay the past continuous. And both mean basically the same thing. It's really up to you which one you want to use. Now, another example, I had seen the film before, and she said that she had seen the film before. Here, the past perfect tense will stay as the past perfect tense. Nothing special happens here, so this one should be pretty easy. Another example, I had been learning French for 2 years before I stopped. And finally, she said that she had been learning French for 2 years before she had stopped. Here, the past perfect continuous tense will stay the past perfect continuous tense. So concerning future tenses, we should also acknowledge that there are a few changes that we should make. For example, if I say, it will be enough to get by. Here, we will change this to, she said it would be enough to get by. The future simple tense will change to what we call the future in the past. We're talking about the future, but in the past. It may seem a little bit strange. Very simply, just remember to change all of your wills to woulds, and you'll be okay. Now, I'd also like to bring your attention to the fact that modal verbs will also change in reported speech, and all modal verbs will assume their past tense form. For example, if someone says to you, I can swim, she told me she could swim. Or another example, it may be raining tomorrow. She told me it might be raining the next day. Similarly, you should watch the film will change into, she told me I should watch the film. Or, I must be in time. She said she must or she had to be in time. You needn't bring it to me tomorrow will change to, she said that I needn't or didn't need to bring it to her the following day. Again, remember to change your time markers. And next, I want to bring our attention to reported questions and commands. In the previous, we've just been talking about statements, but that's not all we need to report. So let's look at some examples. Actually, even better, let's look at some pictures. In this picture, you see children having fun alone in the room. The mom enters and asks, "What are you doing?" The reported question sounds something like this. The mom asked the children what they were doing. The first important piece of grammar I hope that you notice is that the word order in reported questions is in the same order as the affirmative sentence, not as the question. In this example, the introductory verb ask is in the reported question. But what synonyms of ask do you know? We have other words like inquire, wonder, want to know, and we can use all of these in a reported structure. So let's analyze a few more questions. For example, what have you been up to lately? The reported version of this, my sister asked me what I had been up to lately. Or a second example, where were you last Sunday? She wondered where I was the previous Sunday. Or finally, who were you talking to when I met you yesterday? She wanted to know who I was talking to when she had met me the day before. Here, you have to remember when you're reporting a question to use the appropriate, the past tense form, of the question that you were asked. So, if you noticed, all of the rules that I introduced earlier about tense shifts and the need to change your time expressions remain valid when you are reporting questions. But these have all been special questions using reported speech. Let's look at some general questions. Remember, these are questions that can be answered using yes or no. And they will begin with if or whether in reported speech. For example, if someone asks you, would you like to go skiing? Let's say it's your father. You could report it as, Dad asked me if or whether I would like to go skiing. Another example, have you ever been to Brazil? He asked me if or whether I had ever been to Brazil. But if we're considering disjunctive questions, for example, you will tell us the truth, won't you? You report these as something like, we asked her to tell us the truth. Here, your question tags will disappear in reported speech. They are not used and you cannot use them. So this is nothing too difficult. Just remember that the word order and the conjunctions in reported questions are used without the question words. Now, quite often we need to report commands as well as instructions, suggestions, offers, etc. But to do this, we need to make use of some special introductory verbs, such as to offer, to suggest, to demand, to advise, to order, to remind, to warn, to threaten, or even to command. Now, remember that some of these are followed by to with the infinitive, and others are followed by a gerund, and you will need to know these. There's not really a simple rule that you can follow, so these will be necessary for you to learn and know which requires which. But let's look at some examples, and hopefully this will make things a little bit easier. The first example, the policeman said to him, "Stop the car immediately." Reported as, the policeman ordered him to stop the car. Or a second example, will you please carry this bag home? Granny asked me to carry that bag home. Now, be careful here because the phrase this changes to that in the reported speech. Now, the next example, do you feel like going to the park? She asked me whether I felt like going to the park, or she suggested going to the park. Here, she suggested requires the gerund. She suggested going to the park. The next example, don't talk during the exam. The teacher said not to talk during the exam with the infinitive. Next, can I help you? The shop assistant offered to help me. Again, offered with the infinitive. Now that's about all for reported speech, but just to make sure that you understand it, let's do a little test together. I'm going to tell you two sentences and I want you to identify the correct one. Let's start. She said to me she was upset, or she said me she was upset. Right, she said to me. Remember, said requires an object, or requires to if you are using an object with it. The next examples. Jake said that everybody is at home. Jake said everybody was at home. Correct. The second example here is in fact grammatically correct because Jake said everybody was. It needs the past tense. Next, he wondered, where is Sarah? And he wondered where Sarah was. Good. Here, he wondered where Sarah was is correct, because the word order, well, there are actually two problems here. The word order, where Sarah was, just like for an affirmative statement, and where Sarah was in the past tense, because wondered is also being used in the past tense. In the next set, he insisted to not leave that place, or he insisted not to leave that place. Correct. The second here is right once again. He insisted not to leave that place. Remember the word order here with not. And one more example. She told me she may talk to her colleague, or she told me she might talk to her colleague. Very good. The second one is correct here because we are using the appropriate tense for might. In reported speech, may should always transform into might. So I'm sure that reported speech will be a little bit of a stumbling block for you, but be sure to review this lesson a few times and to study the extra materials. In tables 1 and 2, you will see both time expressions and how they change from direct to indirect speech or reported speech, as well as in table 2, the necessary changes to verb tenses when you go from direct to indirect speech. Be sure to review these and know these very, very well. I'm sure that if you look over these a few times, all of this will be very easy for you in the future. I'll see you soon.